After that evening at Orlando's apartment, something quietly changed. We still met twice a week for class, still texted about recipes, still argued over whether pasta should be al dente or a little softer. But between those conversations, small everyday things began to appear. Orlando would send me a photo of the 6 a.m. sky with a caption, "Beautiful morning. Don't forget to eat breakfast." I'd send back a picture of the waffle I'd just made. "First batch burned. Second batch is barely worthy of a teacher." He'd reply almost instantly, "I think the first batch would have been good too, because you made it." Every time I read messages like that, it took me a few seconds to calm down. By mid-November, the school held Student Connection Week. Clubs, departments, and centers all set up booths around the main square. My department was assigned to run a paired cooking competition. I was the instructor, not allowed to compete. When the sign-up list went up on the board, I saw Orlando's name. But his partner wasn't me. It was Emma, a second-year psychology student. Very lively, very pretty, and also one of the best students in the class. I told myself it was nothing, just a random pairing. And yet, all afternoon, I felt irrationally bothered. "Garrett," Emma waved. "Can you come check on us?" I walked over. Orlando was chopping onions. His technique had improved a lot. "Looks good." Emma smiled. "Orlando learns fast. We've been practicing together since last week." I froze. "Practicing?" "Yeah." He came to my apartment twice. I tried to keep my expression neutral. "I see." Orlando looked at me. He seemed to sense something. But I immediately moved on to help another group. That afternoon, I acted very professionally, at least on the surface. I graded fairly, gave every group the same guidance. No one noticed anything, except Orlando. After the competition ended, he stopped me in the hallway. "Garrett. Are you upset with me?" I was surprised. "No. You're lying. I have no reason to be upset." "Then why have you avoided looking at me all afternoon?" I forced a smile. "You're imagining things." Orlando crossed his arms. "Since I met you, you've never once beaten me at lying." I sighed, finally giving in. "Fine." I was a little bothered. "Why?" "I thought you were practicing alone." Orlando blinked. "That's it." Before I could finish, he burst out laughing. Laughing so hard he had to lean against the wall. I was confused. "What's so funny?" he said between laughs. "Emma has a girlfriend." I froze. "What?" "She and her girlfriend have been together 3 years. Last week I even helped her pick out a ring." My face went hot. Orlando tried to hold back his laughter. "Garrett, you were jealous, weren't you?" "I wasn't. Don't deny it. Your ears are completely red." I reflexively touched my ear. Orlando laughed again. For the first time in my life, I just wanted to find a hole to crawl into. "Fine." I gave up. "I was jealous." Orlando went quiet. Maybe even he hadn't expected me to admit it that fast. I looked straight into his eyes. "But I don't have the right to be." I don't even know why I felt that way. The air between us suddenly went strangely still. Orlando looked down at his shoes, then asked softly, "What if?" I said, "I don't like seeing you next to someone else either." "Then what?" I felt my heart pound so hard I could almost hear it. "Orlando." He took a deep breath, then said very quietly, "I think I'm starting to like my cooking teacher." I looked at him, unable to say a word. Everything I had ever imagined, ever hoped for, ever been afraid of, suddenly became real. "I need to remind you of something." I tried to keep my voice steady. Right now, I'm just a teaching assistant, not a professor." Orlando looked puzzled for a few seconds, then burst out laughing. "You're joking, even now?" "I'm nervous." "Me too. I joke when I'm nervous." Orlando took another step. The distance between us was barely an arm's length. "Garrett." "Yeah. I've never liked guys before. I never thought I'd like a student either." He laughed softly. "Then we're even." I laughed too. Seems like it. Right then, the bell in the central building rang. 6 o'clock. More and more students passed through the hallway. Someone noticed us standing so close and whistled teasingly. Orlando and I both stepped back at almost the same moment. He scratched his head. We should probably go. Yeah. I have a shift at the cafe tonight. I know. I'll stop by. Don't. Why not? I won't be able to focus. I laughed. After your shift, then. Orlando smiled. Okay. He turned and took a few steps, then suddenly turned back. Garrett. Thank you. For being jealous. I laughed out loud. Maybe that was the first time in my life I realized. Jealousy isn't always a sign of distrust. Sometimes, it's just the moment two people discover their hearts had quietly chosen each other long ago. But neither Orlando nor I knew yet. Spring of our final year was coming. And with it, choices that would force us both to decide between love and the future. After that afternoon in the hallway, neither of us officially said the words, "Will you go out with me?" But everything changed. Orlando stopped calling me Garrett so formally. Every morning he sent a text. Have you eaten breakfast? If I answered, not yet. Just 10 minutes later, he'd show up outside the kitchen with a hot cup of coffee and a muffin from the cafe where he worked part-time. I once teased him. Are you bribing your teacher? Orlando laughed. No, I'm taking care of the person I like. The word like came out of him so naturally that every time I heard it, my heart still raced like the first time. December arrived with the first cold winds. The whole campus turned white after a heavy snowfall. Students eagerly threw snowballs at each other in front of the library. Orlando and I were struggling to carry crates of ingredients into the kitchen for the last practical class before winter break. Slow down, I said, holding the door. Orlando was hugging a sack of flour bigger than he was. Did you buy out the whole store? I didn't buy it. The department did. You still overthink things. Because your class eats a lot. I only see one student who eats a lot. He pretended to look confused. Who? I'm not ready to say. Orlando laughed. Then it's definitely not me. I only eat when someone cooks for me. I glanced at him. Smooth. Is that line supposed to make me cook for you forever? He was quiet for a moment, then answered very softly. If it were forever, I wouldn't mind. I stopped in the middle of the hallway. Orlando also realized he'd let it slip. We looked at each other, then laughed together. The last class of the semester always had a tradition. Each student would cook a dish tied to a memory of their own. No grading, no pressure, just stories and cooking. When it was Orlando's turn, the whole class grew curious. He stood at the counter, took a deep breath, then set a bag of flour on the table. For the first time since I'd known him, I watched Orlando choose to bake. He looked at the class. This is a dish my mother used to make. The room went silent. I used to think I'd never bake again. But someone taught me that sometimes stepping into a kitchen isn't about remembering what's lost. It's about keeping the best parts. As he said that, he looked toward me, just for a second, but long enough to melt my whole heart. The cake that day wasn't perfect. The top had cracked slightly. The edges were uneven. But when Orlando took it out of the oven, he didn't run, didn't turn away. He just stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing in deeply, then smiling. This smell, he said very softly. It's still my mother's smell. But it isn't frightening anymore. I was the first to clap. Right after, the whole class stood up together. Applause filled the room. A few people quietly wiped away tears. Not because the cake was delicious, but because everyone understood. They had just witnessed someone overcome their own fear. That evening, after cleaning up, Orlando and I walked together to the parking lot. The snow fell heavier. Streetlights lit up the glittering flakes. Neither of us said anything, just the sound of our shoes sinking into the snow. Suddenly, Orlando stopped. Garrett. Do you remember what your mother once said? Learn to cook for the person you love. He nodded. I think I've finished learning. My heart suddenly pounded. Orlando stepped closer. His cheeks were red from the cold. Or maybe from nerves. Couldn't tell. I'm not learning for someone in the future. I'm learning for you. The snow kept quietly falling. The whole campus was nearly empty. I looked at the young man in front of me. The one who once ran away just from the smell of bread. The one who once said it had been so long since anyone cooked him a meal. The one who now made me look forward to stepping into the kitchen every day. I smiled. Orlando. Yeah. I have a rule. What rule? Teachers can't date students. He lowered his head. I know. So. I pulled a piece of paper from my jacket pocket. It was his final grade report. I placed it in his hand. Congratulations. You've just completed the course. Orlando looked down at it, then looked back up. I smiled. Now, can I ask you out? Orlando looked stunned for exactly 1 second. The very next moment, he threw his arms around me. The wool scarf around his neck brushed my cheek, still cold from the snow. I wrapped my arms around him too, feeling both our hearts racing at the same pace. Yes. He laughed against me. I say yes. I pulled back slightly. Orlando. Do you know this is the first time I've ever confessed to someone? Me too. So, what do we do next? He looked at me with eyes both nervous and hopeful. I leaned in and gave him a soft kiss. Very light, very brief, but enough that the whole world around us seemed to go quiet. When we pulled apart, Orlando was smiling so wide his eyes curved into crescents. Garrett. What? I think. That's the best thing you've ever taught me. I laughed. No. From now on, we'll be cooking a lot more meals together. I had no idea. That promise would face its greatest test after graduation. A test called distance. After the night we confessed under the snow, Orlando and I officially became a couple. The funny thing was, no one in the class seemed surprised. 3 days later, when the first class of spring semester began, I had barely stepped into the kitchen when Emma leaned on the counter with both hands, looking at me smugly. Finally together, huh? I froze. What? Emma raised an eyebrow. You thought we didn't know? The whole class burst out laughing. A guy sitting in the back even raised his hand. I bet Emma back in October. $10. Still haven't been paid. Orlando stood beside me, ears burning red. Were we really that obvious? Emma laughed. Obvious enough that every time Garrett walks in, Orlando smiles first. And every time Orlando misses class, Garrett loses focus all day. Hard not to notice. Covered my face with my hand. I thought I was being subtle. Emma shook her head. You teach cooking well. Hiding your feelings, not so much. The class erupted in laughter again. Even I couldn't help laughing along. From then on, we no longer had to sneak around. Of course, at school, I still kept things professional. In class, Orlando still called me Garrett like everyone else. No affectionate gestures. No favoritism. His grades were assessed the same as every other student's. I didn't want anyone to think feelings could replace fairness. That too made Orlando respect me even more. Once, while we were walking back to the dorm together, he said, "There's one thing I love most about you." What's that? You've never made me an exception. Why do you love that? Because I know. If I ever truly succeed in the kitchen someday, it'll be because I worked for it. Not because I'm the teacher's boyfriend. I went quiet. That was exactly what I had always hoped he'd understand. And he did. Spring always comes late in Massachusetts. The maple trees only began sprouting green leaves in late March. One Sunday afternoon, Orlando dragged me to the farmer's market near campus. He said he wanted to learn how to pick ingredients. I used to think all tomatoes were the same. I picked up a plump red tomato. No, they're like people. Some are good for sauce. Some are good eaten raw. Some just need a little salt. Orlando laughed. Are you talking about tomatoes or about students? I'm not confirming anything. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders as we left the stall. So what kind are you? I tilted my head to look at him. What do you think? Orlando pretended to think hard for a long time. You're a potato. I burst out laughing. Why? Because you go well with everything. But if you were missing, the meal would feel empty. I nudged his shoulder gently. That sounds like a confession. It is. I'm still confessing. Midway through the semester, the department organized the final field trip for graduating seniors. The destination was an organic farm nearly 2 hours' drive from school. In the morning, everyone helped harvest vegetables. In the afternoon, groups cooked outdoors. At night, there was a campfire. After dinner, the students sat in a circle sharing their dreams after graduation. Someone wanted to open a restaurant. Someone wanted to be a chef on a cruise ship. Someone wanted to go study in France. Then it was my turn. I want to open a cooking education center. Not just to teach technique, but to teach people who never believed they could cook a meal for someone else. Everyone applauded. Orlando looked at me with a proud expression. Then it was his turn. I want to become an architect. Whether designing homes or schools, I want to create places that make people want to come back. I smiled to myself. That was exactly who Orlando was. Someone always searching for the feeling of belonging. That night, after everyone had gone into their tents, Orlando and I quietly walked out to the field behind the farm. The sky was full of stars. No city lights, just the sound of insects and a gentle breeze. Orlando took my hand. It was the first time he'd done that somewhere people might see. Garrett. If we end up working in 2 different cities, what will you do? I didn't answer right away. It was something I'd been thinking about too. Graduation was only a few months away. Job interviews had already begun. I looked up at the sky. Remember the first time you walked into my class? Orlando laughed. How could I forget? You ran away. Yeah. If someone had told me back then that one day I'd fall in love with that student, I'd have thought they were crazy. Orlando squeezed my hand gently. But you still haven't answered. I turned to look at him. If I had to choose between a dream job and a life with you, I wouldn't choose right away. He frowned. Why not? Because I want to find a way to have both. Orlando looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. That's so Garrett. Always coming up with a recipe. I laughed along. And every recipe needs 2 people. He rested his head on my shoulder. From now on, don't cook alone anymore. I kissed the top of his head softly. I won't. Yet neither of us had any idea. Just 3 weeks later, an email would land in Orlando's inbox, and another would arrive in mine. Those 2 emails would send us to opposite ends of the country. There's a strange thing I realized as graduation approached. Through all 4 years of college, we always wished time would move faster. Wished for break to come. Wished exams would be over. Wished to finally hold the diploma. But in that final semester, everyone started wishing the clock would slow down. Me too. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, I had someone who made me want to stay. Monday morning, I was preparing my lesson plan for the last class when my phone buzzed. An email. The subject line held just one word. Congratulations. I opened it. A culinary education center in Seattle was officially offering me a job. Not chef, not kitchen manager, but exactly the position I'd always dreamed of. Instructor for community cooking skills. I read the letter 3 times. This was the place I'd applied to at the start of the year. The competition was fierce. I'd barely dared to hope. And yet, they chose me. I should have jumped for joy. But the first thought that came to mind was, Seattle is nearly a 5-hour flight from Boston. I looked at the photo of Orlando and me on my desk. His smile in the picture was as bright as it had been that first spring. I sighed softly. I wish things were simpler. That afternoon, Orlando texted. Are you free? I want to see you. Something about the way he texted made me uneasy. I went to the design studio in his department. Orlando was sitting at his usual desk. An email was still open on his screen. He wasn't smiling when he saw me. That rarely happened. Garrett. I got an email too. I looked down at the screen. A major architecture firm in San Francisco. They were inviting Orlando to join their training program for young architects. An opportunity any student would dream of. I knew that, because Orlando had told me about it. He'd applied the year before. Congratulations. I hugged him, and for the first time, that hug wasn't only joy, carried worry too. We went to the Charles River like always. Spring was nearly over. The water glimmered under the sunset. Orlando sat down on the grass. You got a job too, didn't you? I was surprised. How did you know? You're smiling, but your eyes look sad. I laughed. You know me too well. I handed him my phone to show him the email from Seattle. Orlando read it, silent, for a long time. Finally he asked, "When do you have to answer?" 1 week. Same here. We looked at each other. Neither of us said anything more, because we both knew. Seattle and San Francisco, 2 cities, 2 dreams, and nearly 1,000 miles between them. Turn it down, I said first. Orlando shook his head immediately. No, I'm the one who should turn mine down. That's the job you dreamed of. But it's also the job you dreamed of. I know, which is exactly why you shouldn't give it up. He looked at me. Garrett, I don't want one day for you to look at me and think that because of me, you lost your dream. I smiled softly. I was thinking the exact same thing, and then we both burst out laughing. That was so us. Even facing the hardest decision, still thinking of the other person first. In the days that followed, the topic kept coming back. While cooking together, while walking, while studying. But neither of us pushed the other to give up. Instead, we did what Garrett and Orlando always did whenever a problem came up. We made a plan. A blank sheet of paper. 2 pens. In the middle, written in big letters. How do we not lose each other? We listed every possibility. Requesting a transfer. Going to graduate school. Working remotely. Asking to delay the start date. There was even one option. Buy plane tickets every month. Orlando looked at that line and laughed. Sounds expensive. Love is expensive by nature. You're saying that like an ad. Because I'm a teacher. No, you're an idiot. I reached over and ruffled his hair. Thanks. That wasn't a compliment. I'll take it anyway. Graduation came faster than we expected. Dressed in dark blue robes, I stood among hundreds of students on the school's athletic field. When Orlando's name was called, I clapped the loudest. When it was my turn, I heard a familiar whistle. I didn't need to look. I already knew it was Orlando. After the ceremony, everyone hugged and took photos. Orlando's parents didn't come. His father was working in another state. Since his mother passed away, father and son rarely saw each other. Seeing him standing alone, my mother walked over, said nothing, just opened her arms and hugged Orlando. From today on, you've got another son. Orlando froze, then hugged her back. I saw his shoulders shake slightly. That was the first time I ever saw Orlando cry in front of someone else. Not out of sadness, but because, finally, he felt what it was like to have a family again. That night, we went back to the practice kitchen we'd spent 2 years in. The room was empty. Only half the lights were on. I placed 2 old aprons on the table. One with Garrett stitched on it. One with Orlando. This is for you. He ran his fingers over the fabric gently. I thought the school kept these. I asked for it. Why? Because this is where you started. Orlando looked around the kitchen, then smiled. No, this is where we started. I took his hand. For the first time. Right there in that kitchen. No longer teacher. No longer student. Just 2 young men who had just graduated college. Standing before a vast future. A future where they'd have to learn to love each other across a distance measured not in footsteps, but in flights. Asterisk. I always thought long-distance love would be like in the movies. 2 people calling every night, texting all day, flying to see each other on weekends. Romantic, simple, until I stepped into a relationship like that myself. I understood. The hardest part of long distance isn't the distance itself. It's the moments you desperately need a hug, but can only see the person you love through a phone screen. I moved to Seattle in early July. Orlando arrived in San Francisco 3 days before me. The morning of my move, we video called starting at 6 a.m. I was unpacking boxes, laughing. Do you know what I unpacked first? A chef's knife. No, my apron. Orlando held up the apron with his name embroidered on it in front of the screen. Same here. I laughed. Such a good former student. I already graduated. Sorry. Beloved boyfriend. Orlando blushed. That title sounds weird. You'll get used to it. The first few months were so busy we could barely talk except at night. I taught at the center from 9 to 4. In the evenings, I still had to prepare lesson plans. Orlando worked at a large architecture firm. Some days he didn't finish until almost 10 at night. Once I video called him. He'd fallen asleep right at his desk, pencil still in his hand. I couldn't bring myself to wake him, just quietly watched him through the screen for nearly 10 minutes. Then sent a message. Go to sleep, architect. The next morning, he replied, Sorry. Last night I dreamed you were making pancakes. I laughed. Were they good? Didn't get to eat before my alarm went off. We set a rule. No matter how busy, every night we'd set aside at least 15 minutes for each other. No talking about work. No complaining. Just sharing small things. Today, one of my students burned the cookies. Today, Orlando accidentally drew a window the wrong size. Today, I grew my first pot of basil. Today, he found out his coworkers thought we were brothers because of a photo of us on his desk. Those tiny, trivial stories were exactly what kept us close. 3 months later, it was my turn to fly to San Francisco. I didn't tell him beforehand. Just sent one line. Come downstairs. 10 minutes later, I saw Orlando running out from the building entrance. Same white shirt. Same old backpack he'd carried since college. But this time, he didn't stop. He wrapped his arms around me right there on the sidewalk. Not caring about the passersby. Not caring that coworkers were watching. Are you crazy? He laughed against me. The weekend's still 2 days away. I took the day off. For what? To hug my boyfriend. Orlando shook his head. You really are an idiot. Yeah. I missed you. He didn't answer. Just held me tighter. The 2 days in San Francisco went by terrifyingly fast. We went to the farmer's market together. Cooked dinner together in Orlando's small apartment. Sat and watched the sunset by the harbor. On our last night before I flew back to Seattle, Orlando stood in the kitchen for a long time. He took a wooden box out of the cabinet. The same box I'd seen once years before. Inside was still the photo of his mother. But this time there was a new photo added. A photo of me, standing next to Orlando at graduation. He placed the 2 photos side by side. She would have liked you. I looked at Orlando. Maybe she already knew. From the moment you started baking again. He smiled. I think so too. Then he gently took my hand. Garrett. Thank you. For bringing me back into the kitchen. I shook my head. No. You're the one who walked in yourself. I was just standing at the door, waiting for you. When I got back to Seattle, I unexpectedly got a call from the center's director. Garrett, there's a new project. We want to open more community classes in several states. I listened closely. He smiled. And we need someone to help design the model for the new locations. I was a little surprised. You mean? We'll be partnering with an architecture firm in California. I froze. Which firm? He read out the name. It was exactly the firm where Orlando worked. I burst out laughing. Sometimes life is strange like that. When you stop trying to force everything your own way, it quietly finds a path to bring 2 people back together. I immediately texted Orlando. I have good news. My phone buzzed almost instantly. Me too. I smiled. Something told me, maybe, a whole new chapter in both our lives was about to begin.